The alarm on my wrist console does not stop buzzing, and I already know what it means before I even look down. Something has crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. My name is Daniel Ashford, and 3 years ago I was given a job nobody at the Earth Diplomatic Corps wanted. I was sent to speak for humanity in front of species who had been flying between stars while we were still arguing about who owned which piece of land. I was the calm voice in the room, the one who explained things slowly so nobody panicked, the one who smiled while translating threats into polite sentences. Today, there is no smile left on my face. I am standing on the observation deck of a station called Meridian Point, a neutral outpost built at the edge of human space, right where our territory touches the border of an empire called the Corvith Dominion. Below me, through a wall of reinforced glass, I can see 3 Corvith warships holding position exactly where they should not be. Their hulls are a dull bronze color, shaped like curved blades, and they are close enough that I can see the small red lights blinking along their sides, like they are watching us back. A Corvith voice comes through the translator embedded in my ear. It belongs to a diplomat named Senek Voth, a tall, thin being with gray skin and 4 narrow eyes that never blink at the same time. "Ambassador Ashford," Senek says, his voice smooth and unhurried, "you asked for this meeting. I assumed it was to discuss trade routes. Instead, I am told you wish to discuss a warning." I keep my hands folded behind my back, the way I was trained to stand when I need to look steady even if my heart is pounding. "You already know why I am here," I say. "Your ships have entered the Halden Corridor. That corridor belongs to human colonies, 3 settlements, 2 research stations, and a farming world with over 400,000 people living on it." Senek tilts his head, and the gesture looks almost amused. "The corridor is unclaimed by any treaty recognized by the Dominion. We consider it open space." "It was recognized by the Interstellar Council 11 years ago," I answer. "You signed that agreement yourself. I have the record here if you would like to see it." He waves a long gray hand, dismissing the offer before I even finish the sentence. Records change. Borders change. Strength decides what remains true, Ambassador. Humanity has been part of the wider galaxy for what, 40 years? You are still children learning to walk, and yet you speak to me as though you hold the authority of an empire. I feel something tighten in my chest, but I do not let it show on my face. I have learned that showing anger to people like Senek only proves their point. "I am not here to argue about who is older," I say. "I am here to deliver a message from Earth's government, word for word, exactly as it was given to me." Senek folds his 4 arms, 2 over 2, and waits. I speak clearly, because I know this message is being recorded on both sides. "Withdraw your vessels from the Halden Corridor within 72 hours. Return to your recognized border. If this is done, Earth considers the matter closed, and normal relations continue. If this is not done, Earth will treat any further presence in that corridor as an act that requires a direct response." For a moment, Senek says nothing. Then he does something I did not expect. He laughs. It is a strange clicking sound, like 2 pieces of glass tapping together. "A direct response," he repeats, still smiling in whatever way his species smiles. "Ambassador, I have studied your history with great interest. Humanity spent most of its short existence fighting itself over small pieces of land, over words, over old grudges that meant nothing to anyone but you. You built weapons capable of ending your own world, and somehow you never used them completely, because deep down, even you were afraid of what you had made. You talk about response, but everyone in this room knows humanity does not act. Humanity debates. Humanity delays. Humanity sends polite young men like you to speak, instead of doing anything at all. I want to tell him that he has it backwards, that our long, painful history is exactly why this warning should matter more, not less. A species that once came close to destroying itself learns something permanent about what happens when patience runs out. But I do not say this out loud, because I know it will not change his mind today, and some lessons cannot be taught with words. They can only be learned once, and remembered forever after. Instead, I say something simpler. 72 hours, Ambassador Voth. I hope you use them wisely. He straightens, and for the first time there is a flicker of something sharper behind his 4 eyes, something that might have been irritation, or might have been the first small shadow of doubt. You may deliver your message to your superiors, he says. Tell them the Dominion does not take orders from a species that has not yet earned the right to give them. He turns and walks away, his long coat trailing behind him, and the 2 Corvette guards flanking him fall into step without a single word passing between them. I stay on the observation deck for a long time after he leaves, watching those 3 warships sitting quietly in space, lights blinking, engines humming, patient and unmoving, like they have already decided the deadline means nothing. Behind me, a voice speaks softly. That went about as well as we expected. I turn and see Colonel Grace Ellison approaching, her boots clicking against the metal floor. She is the ranking military officer assigned to Meridian Point, a woman in her early 40s with short dark hair and eyes that always seem to be calculating 3 moves ahead. She has never once raised her voice in front of me, and somehow that makes her more unsettling than any officer who shouts. He thinks we're bluffing, I say. They always think that, Grace answers, standing beside me and looking out at the same 3 warships. It's the easiest mistake to make about us. We don't look dangerous. We don't act dangerous. Right up until the exact moment we do. You think it will come to that? Grace is quiet for a moment, studying the ships as if she is counting something only she can see. I think, she says slowly, that a species who forgets its own history of conflict makes a very different kind of enemy than a species who remembers every single lesson from it. The Corvette have never truly been tested. We were tested for most of our existence, against each other, before we ever left our own solar system. That's not something you unlearn. I look at her, and something in her calm tone makes the back of my neck feel cold. So what happens now? Now, Grace says, turning away from the window, we wait, 72 hours, and we hope, sincerely, that they choose to leave. She walks away without another word, leaving me alone with the view of those 3 ships and the quiet, growing feeling that hope may not be enough this time. I send my report to Earth that night, describing the meeting exactly as it happened, including every word Senec Voth said about humanity being children who only talk and never act. I expect a reply asking for more diplomatic options, more patience, more time. Instead, the reply I receive is short, calm, and strangely final. The warning stands. Prepare for what comes next. I read those 6 words 3 times before I finally set the console down, and for the first time since I arrived on Meridian Point, I understand that this is no longer a conversation. It is a countdown. The 72 hours pass slower than any 3 days I have ever lived through. I do not sleep well. I keep checking the sensor feeds every few hours, half expecting to see the Corvette ships gone, and half expecting to see them still sitting there, unmoved, like stones that refuse to be pushed. On the morning of the 3rd day, I get my answer, and it is worse than either possibility I had imagined. I am woken by Grace Ellison herself, standing in the doorway of my small quarters, already dressed, already composed, though something in the tightness of her jaw tells me the news is not good. You need to see this, she says. I follow her down the corridor to the command deck, where a dozen officers are gathered around a central display, all of them quiet in a way that feels heavier than shouting would have. On the screen is a recording, time-stamped from 6 hours earlier, taken from a small sensor drone near one of our outposts in the Halden corridor. The outpost is called Aldren Watch, a modest research station with a crew of 42 people studying mineral formations on a moon with no breathable air. It has no weapons. It has no military purpose. It exists to gather data and send it home. In the recording, 3 Corvette vessels approach the station. There is no communication first, no warning, no demand. There is simply a bright flash of light, and then Aldren Watch is gone, replaced by a slow, expanding cloud of debris drifting silently against the black backdrop of space. I feel my stomach drop in a way I have never experienced before, a cold, sinking weight that makes it hard to breathe for a moment. 42 people, Grace says quietly, watching the same footage. Scientists, engineers, a married couple who had been out there for 6 years, studying rock samples. Was there any warning? I ask, though I already know the answer. None, says a young officer standing near the display, his voice tight. One moment they were transmitting a routine data update, the next moment, silence. Within the hour, a formal message arrives from the Corveth Dominion, addressed directly to Earth's government. I am given a copy to review before it is released publicly, and I read it twice, unable to believe the tone of it. The message describes the destruction of Aldren Watch as an unfortunate result of what they call a training exercise, conducted inside what they still insist is Dominion territory. There is no apology. There is a brief mention of regret for what they call an unintended loss, followed immediately by a statement that the Dominion holds full authority over the region and that any future presence by human vessels or personnel in the corridor will be treated the same way. I read this message standing in the same observation deck where I delivered our warning to Senek Voth only 3 days earlier, and I find myself thinking about the way he laughed when I spoke of consequences. I wonder if he is laughing now. Grace finds me there again, staring out at the same 3 warships, which have not moved an inch from their original position, as though daring us to respond. They didn't even try to hide it, I say. They destroyed an entire station full of civilians and then sent us a message calling it training. They don't think we can do anything about it, Grace answers. That's the whole point of the message. It's not an apology, it's a demonstration. I turn to look at her. A demonstration of what? Of how little they respect the line we drew, she says. They wanted us to see exactly how easily they could cross it, and exactly how little it cost them to do so. I feel anger rising in me, sharp and sudden, but underneath it is something else, something quieter and stranger. I notice that the usual noise of the station, the chatter of officers, the hum of routine work, has gone almost completely silent. People are moving through the corridors calmly, efficiently, without panic, but also without their usual conversation. It reminds me of a held breath. Over the next 2 days, I watch this same quiet spread through every level of Meridian Point. There is no shouting, there is no visible fear. There is only a growing stillness, and somehow that stillness feels far more dangerous than any outburst could have. I am asked to attend a private briefing with Grace and a handful of senior officers, something I have never been included in before. When I arrive, the room falls quiet, and Grace gestures for me to sit. Ambassador Ashford, she begins, Earth's Central Command has authorized a response to the destruction of Aldren Watch. You are being briefed because as our diplomatic liaison, you may be asked to explain certain movements to the Council before they become public. What kind of movements? I ask. An older officer beside Grace, a man named Colonel Peter Marlowe, taps the display in front of him, and a series of fleet positions appear across a star map. Dozens of markers I have never seen before, spread across systems that I did not know we had any presence in at all. These fleets have existed for a long time, Marlowe says, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. Longer than most people realize. Earth has never announced their existence publicly, because doing so would have invited exactly the kind of confrontation we are now facing. They were built quietly, over decades, following our own history of conflict and the lessons we learned the hard way about what happens when a threat is ignored for too long. I stare at the map, trying to understand the scale of what I am looking at. There are more ships represented on that screen than I ever imagined humanity possessed, spread across dozens of systems, positioned with a precision that suggests none of this happened by accident. How long has this been planned? I ask quietly. Grace answers this time, since before you or I were born, Ambassador. Since the first time Earth made contact with another species and realized how quickly some of them judge weakness. We do not enjoy this. But we learned a long time ago that warnings only work if the ones giving them are prepared to follow through completely and quietly, without hesitation, the moment they are ignored. I think back to my meeting with Senec Voth, the way he smiled when he called humanity children who only talk and never act, the way he was so certain that our history of conflict made us weaker rather than more careful. I begin to understand, slowly and uncomfortably, that he had it exactly backwards. What happens next? I ask. Marlowe looks at me directly, his expression steady. Earth is issuing one final message to the Corveth Dominion, a specific date and time. After that point, if their vessels remain in human territory, or if any further action is taken against human colonies, the response will not be a warning, it will be final. I swallow hard, feeling the weight of that single word settle over the room. Final, I repeat. Complete, Grace says simply. Not a battle, not a war fought over months or years. An ending, delivered all at once, executed exactly as it has been planned for decades. I want to ask more questions, but something in the stillness of the room tells me I already have all the answers I need. I think of the 42 people aboard Aldren Watch, gone in a single flash of light without warning, and I think of Senec Voth's calm, mocking voice describing humanity as a species that only debates and delays. I do not know, in that moment, whether to feel afraid or, strangely, quietly certain. Perhaps both feelings can exist at the same time. Later that evening, I draft the final message myself, at Grace's request, because Earth's government wants it delivered in the same calm, precise diplomatic tone I used the first time. I choose my words carefully, knowing they may be the last words exchanged between our two peoples before everything changes. I record the message the following morning, standing once again in front of Senec Voth, whose 4 eyes study me with something between curiosity and amusement. "Another warning, Ambassador," he asks, before I even begin speaking. "The same warning," I answer. "Delivered one final time." I state the exact date and time by which every Corveth vessel must withdraw from human territory. I state, clearly and without exaggeration, that any presence beyond that point will be treated as a permanent decision on their part, not ours. I do not raise my voice. I do not add threats or dramatic language. I simply state facts, the same way I would read a schedule or a weather report, because I have come to understand that this calm, bureaucratic precision is somehow more unsettling to people like Senec than any display of anger could ever be. For the first time since I met him, Senec Voth does not laugh. He studies me for a long moment, his 4 eyes shifting slightly out of rhythm with each other, and when he finally speaks, his voice has lost some of its earlier confidence. "You speak of this deadline as though it were already decided." "It is already decided," I say quietly. "The only thing left to decide is what you choose to do before it arrives." He does not answer right away. Instead, he turns to the small group of Corveth officials standing behind him, exchanging a few words in their own language, too quiet for the translator to catch. When he turns back to me, some of the earlier amusement has returned to his expression, though it now looks slightly forced. "The Dominion does not respond well to threats, Ambassador Ashford," he says. "We will remain exactly where we are." I nod once, because there is nothing left to argue. "Then I hope sincerely that you are prepared for what that decision means," I say. I turn and walk away, leaving him standing there with his officials, and as the doors close behind me, I feel the countdown begin in earnest, ticking steadily toward a moment I am not sure any of us are truly ready for. The days leading up to the deadline feel unlike anything I have experienced in my 3 years of service on Meridian Point. There is no panic, no visible fear among the crew, only a strange, focused calm that settles over the entire station like a held breath waiting to be released. I find myself unable to eat much, unable to sleep more than a few hours at a time, and yet everyone around me moves through their duties with the same steady efficiency as always, as though nothing unusual is happening at all. Grace Ellison seems to be the only person entirely unaffected by the tension. I find her one evening in the small observation lounge near the command deck, sitting alone with a cup of something warm, watching the stars outside the reinforced glass. "You should get some rest, Ambassador," she says without turning around, somehow aware of my presence before I even speak. I keep thinking about the deadline, I admit, sitting down across from her. 2 days left. What if they still don't leave? Grace takes a slow sip from her cup before answering. Then 2 days from now, at the exact moment stated in your message, humanity stops asking and starts acting. That's all there is to it. Doesn't that frighten you? I ask. She considers the question seriously, the way she considers everything. It used to frighten me, a long time ago, when I first learned what our fleets were truly capable of. Then I realized something important. We do not build weapons because we enjoy the idea of using them. We build them because we remember, better than almost any other species out there, what happens when you are unprepared for the moment someone else decides to take something from you by force. Our own history taught us that lesson at a terrible cost, long before we ever met another species among the stars. I think of the old records from Earth's own past, conflicts that span decades, cities and populations lost to disagreements that could have been settled through patience and dialogue instead. I think about how those painful chapters shaped the careful, deliberate way modern Earth approaches every decision involving power and force. So this has always been about not repeating that history, I say slowly. Exactly, Grace answers. We do not act quickly or carelessly. We plan everything with the same patience it took us centuries to learn on our own. But once a decision like this is made, once every warning has been given and ignored, we do not hesitate, because hesitation is what allows suffering to continue longer than it needs to. I sit with her in silence for a while, watching the stars, thinking about Senec Voth's calm dismissal of everything I told him, and the 42 people aboard Aldren Watch who never had the chance to explain their side of anything before their lives ended in a single flash of light. The final day arrives with an unsettling ordinary quality to it. There is no dramatic countdown displayed anywhere on the station, no tense gathering of officers around a central clock. Instead, life continues exactly as it always does. Meals are served, reports are filed, routine maintenance continues in every section of Meridian Point. I find this more unsettling than any visible tension could have been. At the exact hour stated in our final message, I am standing once again on the observation deck, watching the same 3 Corvette warships that have remained motionless in that same position for nearly 2 weeks. I check the time on my console. The deadline has passed by 3 minutes, and nothing visible has changed. The warships still sit there, engines humming, lights blinking steadily along their curved bronze hulls. For a moment, I allow myself to hope that perhaps this will simply end quietly, without any further consequence, that perhaps the Corvette will finally choose to withdraw even now, past the stated deadline, and that Earth's response will be held back in exchange for a late but genuine retreat. That hope lasts less than 10 minutes. An alert sounds softly through the station, not the harsh emergency alarm I expected, but a calm, measured tone, indicating an incoming communication. I am summoned to the command deck immediately, where Grace and several senior officers are already gathered around the central display, watching a series of reports scroll rapidly across the screen. "What's happening?" I ask, stepping closer. "The response has begun," Grace says quietly, her eyes fixed on the display. I expect to see images of battle, explosions, ships firing against one another in dramatic confrontation. Instead, what I see is something far quieter, and somehow far more unsettling. The reports describe a series of coordinated actions occurring simultaneously across dozens of systems within Corvette territory. Supply convoys that were mid-transit between Dominion worlds have gone silent, their communication signals cut cleanly without any visible confrontation. Several major shipyards, responsible for constructing and repairing Corvette vessels, report a sudden and complete loss of power across their entire facilities, followed immediately by silence. Command vessels stationed near key Dominion strongholds stop transmitting entirely, one after another, in a pattern too precise to be anything other than deliberate. "I don't understand," I say, watching the reports continue to scroll. "Where is the fighting? Where are the battles?" Marlowe, standing nearby, answers without looking away from the screen. "There isn't going to be a battle in the way you're imagining, Ambassador. What you are witnessing is not a war fought over time. It is the execution of a plan that has been prepared, rehearsed, and refined for decades, designed specifically to remove an opponent's ability to continue functioning as a threat, all at once, before they have any real chance to organize a defense. But there must be some kind of confrontation happening, I press. Some of those Corvette ships must have crews, people. Grace turns to look at me directly, her expression steady but not unkind. This isn't about confrontation for its own sake, Daniel. Earth's fleets are not designed to prove a point through prolonged conflict. They are designed to end a threat as quickly and completely as possible, minimizing the length of time anyone, on either side, remains in danger. A war that lasts for years costs far more in every measurable way than a single, overwhelming action carried out with total preparation. I sit with this explanation, trying to reconcile the calm, almost clinical tone of the officers around me with the enormous scale of what is happening across dozens of star systems in this very moment. Over the following hours, more reports arrive, each one describing the same pattern repeating across different regions of Corvette territory. Communication hubs go silent. Fleet formations lose contact with their command structures entirely. Defensive positions that took years to establish are rendered useless within moments, their systems disabled before any counter-response can even be organized. By the time a full day has passed, the reports begin to shift in tone. Where earlier updates described military targets, now they describe an entire structure of government and defense that has effectively stopped functioning. Messages from remaining Corvette officials, when they arrive at all, are no longer confident or dismissive. They are confused, urgent, searching for any explanation of what has happened to their once powerful empire in the span of a single rotation. I think of Senec Voth's calm, mocking voice from only weeks earlier, describing humanity as a species incapable of decisive action, as children who only talk and delay. I wonder, with a strange mixture of sadness and quiet certainty, whether he understands yet exactly how wrong he was. 3 days after the deadline passed, I am called into another private briefing, this time attended by representatives from several other species within the wider Interstellar Council, all of whom have requested an explanation directly from Earth regarding the scale of what has occurred. I am asked to attend as our diplomatic representative, tasked with explaining, calmly and clearly, exactly what happened and why. The meeting takes place in a neutral chamber aboard a large council station, a wide circular room with seating arranged for representatives of a dozen different species, many of whom I recognize from previous diplomatic gatherings, though none of them have ever looked at me quite the way they do now. A representative from a species called the Ilvinari, small, pale, and normally quite composed in these settings, speaks first, her voice carrying a note of genuine unease. Ambassador Ashford, the Council understands that a warning was issued to the Corvette Dominion regarding territorial disputes. What we do not understand is the scale of the response that followed. Reports suggest near total incapacitation of their military and governing infrastructure within a matter of days. Surely this response was disproportionate to the initial provocation. I choose my words carefully, aware that everyone in this room is now looking at humanity through an entirely new lens. The initial warning was clear and specific, I say. It stated exact terms, an exact timeline, and exact consequences should those terms not be met. The Dominion was given every opportunity to withdraw peacefully. Instead, they destroyed a civilian research station, resulting in the loss of 42 lives, and followed this action with a formal statement indicating they intended to continue such actions without remorse. Earth's response was not a decision made in anger. It was the fulfillment of a warning that had already been clearly stated, planned for, and prepared long in advance. Another representative, a tall, armored being from a species called the Korathi, known throughout the Council for their own long history of military strength, speaks next, his voice low and thoughtful. It is not the response itself that concerns most of us, Ambassador. It is the realization that humanity possessed this level of capability all along, quietly, without any of us truly understanding its scale, until the moment it was finally used. I nod slowly, understanding exactly what he means, and understanding, too, that this realization will likely shape the way every species in this room approaches humanity from this point forward. We do not display our full capability without reason, I say. We never have. It is not humanity's nature to seek confrontation or to demonstrate strength simply to be seen as powerful, but it is also not humanity's nature to allow a clearly stated warning to be ignored without consequence, particularly once innocent lives have already been lost as a result of that decision. The room falls silent for a long moment, each representative considering my words in their own way. Finally, the Ilvanari representative speaks again, her voice quieter than before. Then let it be understood, across this council, that when humanity issues a warning, it should be regarded with the same seriousness as any binding agreement, and not dismissed as mere words. That would be a wise understanding to carry forward, I say simply. As the meeting concludes and the representatives begin to disperse, I find myself standing alone for a moment in the wide circular chamber, thinking back over everything that has happened since I first delivered that initial warning to Senek Voth, weeks earlier, when he laughed and dismissed humanity as a species incapable of decisive action. I think of the quiet, steady way Grace Ellison and the other officers aboard Meridian Point carried out their duties throughout this entire ordeal, never raising their voices, never displaying anger or excitement, simply following through on a plan that had been prepared decades in advance, exactly as promised. And I think, with a strange mixture of sorrow and quiet resolve, that perhaps this is the truest lesson any species could learn about humanity. We do not seek to prove our strength through words or displays of power. We simply remember, more clearly than most, what happens when a warning is ignored, and we prepare, patiently and thoroughly, for the moment we hope will never come, but which we are always ready to meet if it does. 2 weeks after the council meeting, I am assigned to join a small delegation traveling directly into what remains of Corvith space, tasked with overseeing the transition of governance and assisting with the establishment of new communication channels between Earth and the surviving Dominion territories. Grace Ellison leads the military portion of the delegation, while I remain responsible for the diplomatic side of things, a role that feels far heavier now than it ever did during my earlier meetings with Senek Voth. The journey takes several days aboard a modest transport vessel, and I spend much of that time reviewing reports detailing the current state of Corveth territory. The numbers are difficult to fully absorb. Once a dominion spanning dozens of star systems, home to a proud and confident empire, is now reduced to a fraction of its former reach, its military capability effectively dismantled, its central government scattered and struggling to maintain any coordinated authority. I find myself thinking often about the phrase Grace used weeks earlier, back on Meridian Point. Not a war fought over time, but an ending, delivered all at once. Reading through these reports, I finally understand the full weight of what those words meant. When we arrive at the outer edge of what was once considered the heart of Corvith space, I am given my first direct look at the scale of the transformation. Massive shipyards that once produced entire fleets of warships now sit dark and silent, their structures intact but completely powerless, stripped of the ability to function without ever being physically destroyed. Grace explains, as we observe the scene from our transport's viewing deck, that this was intentional. We didn't want to leave behind ruins that would take generations to rebuild from nothing, she says, studying the darkened shipyard through the reinforced glass. The goal was never destruction for its own sake. It was to remove the ability to threaten anyone further, while leaving enough intact that a future built on peaceful terms remains possible. I consider this distinction carefully, understanding now that even in delivering what could only be described as an overwhelming and complete response, humanity had still exercised a kind of careful restraint, a deliberate choice to disable rather than obliterate wherever such a choice was possible. Our delegation is escorted to a large administrative complex on one of the remaining functional Corveth worlds, a place still governed, though only barely, by a coalition of surviving officials attempting to hold together what remains of their once vast empire. I am told that Senik Voth himself has requested to be present at our arrival, a request that surprises me given the circumstances of our previous meetings. When I finally see him again, standing among a small group of remaining Corvith officials in a quiet reception hall, I barely recognize him. The confident, mocking tone he once carried is gone entirely, replaced by a kind of tired, careful humility that seems foreign on his features. His 4 eyes, once sharp with amusement, now look weary, and he approaches me slowly, without any of the dismissive posture he displayed during our earlier encounters. "Ambassador Ashford," he says quietly, his translated voice noticeably subdued, "I did not expect to see you again so soon. Nor did I expect to be standing here under these circumstances," I answer honestly. He is quiet for a moment, glancing around at the administrative complex, at the reduced number of officials present, at the visible signs of an empire that has lost far more than territory in recent weeks. "May I ask you something directly, Ambassador?" he says finally, "not as a formal representative of your government, but simply as the person who delivered our warning." "You may ask," I say. "Why warn us at all?" he asks, his voice carrying a genuine, searching quality I have never heard from him before. If this outcome was already prepared, already planned for decades in advance, as I have since learned, why bother with warnings, with deadlines, with diplomatic language? Why not simply act, if the result was always going to be the same regardless of our decision? I consider his question carefully before answering, understanding that my response carries weight far beyond this single conversation. Because the outcome was never guaranteed to be the same, I say. Earth does not wish for conflict. We never have. Every warning we issued was genuine, offering a real opportunity to avoid everything that followed. Had your vessels withdrawn when first asked, none of this would have happened. Had the destruction of Aldren Watch never occurred, had your government responded with even the smallest acknowledgement of the harm caused, the situation may have resolved through continued dialogue rather than through what ultimately took place. Senik considers this for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the particular way of his species. "We believed your warnings to be a formality," he admits quietly, "a demonstration of diplomatic procedure rather than a genuine statement of consequence. We believed, based on everything we understood about your history and your species' evident preference for prolonged discussion over decisive action, that no real consequence would follow regardless of our choices. That belief, I say gently, was the single greatest miscalculation your government made throughout this entire situation." He nods slowly, and for a moment, something like genuine regret crosses his features. "I understand that now, Ambassador, though I confess, I wish I had understood it sooner, before so much was lost that can never fully be recovered. I think of the 42 lives lost aboard Aldren Watch, families who received no warning at all before their world ended in a single flash of light, and I find that whatever sympathy I might feel for Senik Voth's current circumstances remains carefully measured against that memory. So do many others, I say quietly. On both sides of this. We stand together in silence for a moment. 2 representatives from vastly different worlds, each carrying the weight of decisions made and consequences delivered, before Senik finally speaks again. "What happens now, Ambassador? For what remains of the Dominion, and for the wider council that watches all of this unfold?" "Now," I say, echoing words Grace once spoke to me on Meridian Point, "we work toward stability. Earth has no interest in prolonging this situation further, or in punishing your people beyond what has already occurred. Our delegation is here to help establish functioning communication and governance structures, to ensure that what remains of your worlds can continue forward without further conflict." "And the wider council?" he asks. "How do the other species view what has happened here?" I think back to the meeting in the circular chamber, the careful, unsettled tone of representatives from a dozen different worlds, each recalculating their understanding of humanity in real time. "I believe," I say slowly, "that every species within the Council now understands something about humanity that perhaps was not fully appreciated before. We are not a species that seeks power for its own sake, nor do we display our capabilities without genuine reason, but we are also not a species that allows a clearly stated warning to be dismissed without consequence, particularly once innocent lives have already been lost. Senec nods again, this time with what appears to be genuine understanding rather than mere acknowledgement. Then let it be said, from this point forward, that the Dominion understands this lesson as well, he says quietly, however difficult it has been to learn. Over the following weeks, our delegation works alongside surviving Corvith officials to establish new frameworks for governance and communication, a process that proves slow and often difficult, given the scale of what has been lost and the deep uncertainty that now permeates every level of what remains of their society. I spend long hours in meetings, translating not just words but underlying intentions, helping both sides understand a path forward that avoids further conflict while still holding the Dominion accountable for the actions that led to this outcome. Throughout this process, I notice a change in how other species across the wider galaxy begin to interact with human representatives, where once we were regarded with a kind of polite dismissal, treated as capable but ultimately unthreatening newcomers to the wider community of civilizations, we are now approached with a careful, measured respect that borders on caution. Diplomatic exchanges that once felt casual now carry a weight of consideration that was simply absent before. I find this shift uncomfortable in some ways, uncertain whether this new caution represents genuine respect or simply a kind of fear that keeps other species from testing us the way the Corvith Dominion once did. Grace, when I share this concern with her one evening aboard our transport vessel, offers a perspective that stays with me long after our conversation ends. "It doesn't matter entirely which one it is, Daniel," she says, looking out at the quiet stars beyond the viewing deck. "What matters is that it prevents further situations like the one we just lived through. If caution keeps another species from making the same mistake the Corvith made, then perhaps that caution serves everyone better than false confidence ever could." I consider her words carefully, understanding that whatever discomfort I feel about this new dynamic between humanity and the wider galaxy, the alternative, a return to being underestimated and dismissed the way we once were, carries a far greater risk of leading to further loss of life on both sides of any future disagreement. As our delegation's work draws toward its conclusion, I find myself reflecting often on everything that has happened since that first meeting with Senec Voth, weeks that feel now like an entire lifetime compressed into a short and difficult span of time. I think of the quiet, steady resolve displayed by every human officer and official I worked alongside throughout this ordeal, never boastful, never eager for confrontation, but never hesitant either, once a decision had been made and a warning had gone unheeded. And I think, too, of Senec Voth's tired, searching question, asked quietly in that reception hall. Why warn us at all, if this outcome was already prepared? I understand now, more clearly than I did even in the moment I answered him, that the warning itself was never simply a formality or a diplomatic procedure to be checked off before action could be taken. It was a genuine offer, extended honestly, giving another species every real opportunity to choose a different path. That the Corvith Dominion chose not to take that opportunity does not diminish the sincerity with which it was offered. It simply means that some lessons, however clearly stated in advance, can only truly be learned once they have already been lived through. It has been nearly 2 years since the events surrounding the Aldren corridor, and I am writing this final account from a small office aboard a new station built at the edge of what is now called the Ashford Accord, a formal agreement establishing clear terms of conduct between Earth and every species within the Interstellar Council. I did not choose the name for this agreement, and I confess it still feels strange to hear my own name attached to something so significant, but Grace insists it serves as a useful reminder to every species who reads it, a reminder that warnings issued by humanity are never simply words. The years since the Dominion situation have brought changes to the wider galaxy that I could not have fully predicted, even standing in that circular council chamber listening to representatives recalculate their understanding of humanity in real time. What surprises me most, looking back, is not the scale of what humanity accomplished during those difficult weeks, but the quiet, steady way the wider galaxy has adjusted itself around that single, decisive lesson. I remained involved in the transition process for what remained of Corvith territory for nearly a year following our initial delegation, working alongside Senec Voth and a growing coalition of surviving officials as they slowly rebuilt functioning systems of governance across their remaining worlds. It was slow, often frustrating work, filled with setbacks and small victories in equal measure, but by the end of that year, something resembling genuine stability had returned to what was left of the Dominion. Senec and I developed, over that long year of careful cooperation, something I would hesitate to call friendship, but which carried a mutual respect that neither of us expected when we first met, all those months earlier, in a very different kind of conversation. He often told me, during quiet moments between formal meetings, that he found himself thinking frequently about that first warning I delivered, replaying it in his memory, trying to identify the exact moment where a different choice might have led to a different outcome for his people. There was no single moment, I told him once, during one of our last conversations before my formal assignment to the transition delegation concluded. There were many moments, spread across those first weeks, any one of which could have changed everything. The warning itself, the destruction of Aldren Watch, the formal response that followed, calling it training rather than acknowledging what it truly was. Each moment offered a choice, and each choice, taken together, led to where we ultimately arrived. Do you believe my people will remember this lesson? He asked me then, his 4 eyes carrying a weariness that had softened considerably since our first meeting, though it had never fully disappeared. I believe, I answered honestly, that some lessons, once learned at this cost, are rarely forgotten by those who lived through them directly. Whether future generations remember with the same clarity is something only time will answer. I think of that conversation often now, especially during moments like this one, sitting quietly in my small office, reflecting on everything that has happened since that first tense meeting aboard Meridian Point. The wider council has changed considerably in the 2 years since the Dominion situation concluded. Species who once treated humanity with a kind of polite dismissal now approach every interaction with careful consideration, weighing their words and decisions with a thoughtfulness that was largely absent in our earlier dealings with the wider galaxy. I have attended dozens of diplomatic meetings since then, representing Earth's interests across a range of different negotiations, and I notice, in nearly every single one, a particular kind of attentiveness whenever the topic of clearly stated boundaries or agreements arises. It is not fear exactly, though I understand why some might describe it that way. It is closer to a kind of respectful caution, an understanding among nearly every species within the Council that when Earth states a boundary clearly and formally, that boundary should be treated with the same seriousness as any binding agreement, rather than dismissed as diplomatic formality. Grace Ellison retired from active military command shortly after our delegation's work concluded, though she remains involved as an advisor to Earth's Central Command, consulted whenever questions arise regarding the careful balance between diplomatic patience and decisive action. I visit her occasionally, when my own duties allow, and we often find ourselves discussing the wider implications of everything we witnessed together during those difficult weeks. Do you ever wonder, I asked her, during one such visit, not long ago, whether we could have avoided all of it? Whether there was some other path that might have led to the same result, without the cost that came with it? Grace considered the question for a long moment before answering, the same careful, measured consideration she brought to every decision I ever witnessed her make. I've asked myself that question many times, Daniel, she said finally, and I keep arriving at the same answer. We offered every reasonable opportunity for a different outcome. We warned clearly. We waited patiently. We gave every chance for a peaceful resolution before ever taking further action. The choice to ignore those opportunities was never ours to make. It belonged entirely to the Dominion, and to the decisions their leadership chose at every step along the way. Does that make it easier to accept? I asked. It makes it easier to live with, she answered honestly. Not the same as easy, but easier. I have thought about her answer often since that conversation, particularly during quiet moments like this one, reflecting on everything that unfolded since my very first meeting with Cynic Wolf, when he laughed at the idea that humanity might ever follow through on a warning. There is a particular kind of weight that comes with being part of a species whose history includes both terrible conflict and a hard-won, careful wisdom drawn directly from that conflict. We are not a species that seeks power for its own sake, nor do we take any satisfaction in the outcome that unfolded across Corveth territory during those difficult weeks. But we are also not a species willing to allow innocent lives to be lost without consequence, simply because acting decisively might be uncomfortable, or because patience alone cannot always prevent further harm from occurring. I think, often, about how differently things might have unfolded had Cynic Voth and his government chosen to listen during that very first meeting, all those months ago, when I stood calmly before him and delivered a warning that he dismissed as empty diplomatic procedure. I think about the 42 people aboard Aldren Watch, whose lives ended in a single flash of light because their government believed, wrongly, that humanity's careful patience meant an unwillingness to act. And I think finally about the wider lesson that has spread quietly across the galaxy in the 2 years since, carried not through boastful declarations or displays of overwhelming force, but through the simple, steady example of a species that offers genuine warnings, means exactly what it says, and follows through completely when those warnings go unheeded. If there is one thing I hope future generations understand from everything I have witnessed and recorded here, it is this. Humanity does not seek conflict, and we take no pride in the outcomes that sometimes follow when conflict cannot be avoided. But we remember, more clearly than most species who have never faced the kind of struggles woven through our own history, exactly what happens when a clearly stated boundary is ignored, and we prepare, patiently and thoroughly, for that possibility, hoping always that such preparation will never need to be used. A warning delivered by humanity is never simply a formality. It is an honest offer, extended in good faith, giving every opportunity for a different outcome to those willing to listen. Whether that offer is accepted or ignored, remains, as it always has, entirely in the hands of those who receive it. I close this account now, sitting quietly in my small office at the edge of the Ashford Accord, watching the same steady stars that once framed my very first meeting with Cynic Voth, all those months ago. The galaxy has changed considerably since that day, shaped by lessons learned at a cost none of us wished to pay, but which none of us were willing to ignore once the warning had gone unheeded. Some warnings are given many times, softened and repeated until they lose all meaning. Humanity's warnings are given once, clearly and completely, exactly as promised. What follows, should that single warning be dismissed, is never a matter of anger or excess. It is simply the quiet, steady fulfillment of a promise, delivered exactly as stated, to those who chose not to believe it would come.